In midsummer 1983, 23 residents of Maine went off on a trip around the world. This is a small fraction of what they saw behind the curtains. We'll first make the trip as tourists, seeing the sights and experiencing the cultures. In the next part, we'll learn what they learned about farming and agriculture in Russia and China, because this was an agricultural goodwill mission under the banner of People-to-People International. In a pre-trip meeting, the group was told that President Eisenhower once said,
"People want peace so badly that someday governments are going to have to get out of the way and let them have it."
These people had joined together in that spirit to learn as much as possible in 2 weeks about the Russians and Chinese and their agriculture. There were potato farmers, agricultural equipment merchants, consultants, and even a postmaster, a retired teacher, and yours truly, a one-man band from Maine Public Television. With words of encouragement and advice from Maine's Minister of Agriculture and People-to-People, the delegates of this goodwill mission took off on the first leg of their journey. In New York, they met the U.S. guide who briefed the group about drinking water, don't, tipping, don't, pictures, anything but military installations or airports. In Finland, they joined Russians and others heading for Leningrad, once known as Petrograd, and before 1914, St. Petersburg, founded in 1703 by Peter the Great, Tchaikovsky's final home, birthplace of the First Communist Party, overrun by the Nazis in 1941 and liberated in 1944, home of the Hermitage Museum or Winter Palace, the State Museum of Ethnography, Peter the Great's Summer Palace, and enough canals to earn the name Venice of Northern Europe. Some little-known facts about Leningrad: it has a population of 4.6 million with an average family size of under 4 people. Rent never exceeds 4% of family income, and it costs about $6 to $7 for electricity and cooking gas each month. This was a tourist stop for the group. No visits to farms or talks with agricultural officials, but a lot of luxury. The hotel, built by Swedes, is one of the newest and largest in the country. Maine's ambassador for peace, Samantha Smith, had stayed there the week before. The contrast between the hotel's newness and some of the area's drabness was startling, but as our Russian tour guide pointed out, Leningrad was badly damaged in World War II, and the reconstruction is still going on. Our hotel was built right next to the Baltic Sea. One of the only incidents of possible surveillance happened while taping hotel scenery. It was 7:36 a.m. behind the hotel. 2 large reflecting pools lay quietly when suddenly, thinking this might just be a coincidence and not an attempt to pretty up the picture, I checked the next day for fountain time. It wasn't 7:36, it was 8:45. Leningrad is a lot like Paris and other old European cities, at least on the surface. The buildings downtown are classically old, and parks and squares are many. What differentiates Leningrad and the other Soviet cities on our list from West European cities was the lack of commercial advertising. There was plenty of another kind of advertising, though, most using one word over and over: mir, or peace. Another quite startling difference was the lack of concern for groundkeeping in and around apartment complexes. Nice lawns are obviously low on their priority list. Someone said the Soviet Union is the land of lines, and while lines aren't a Russian invention, there did seem to be a lot of people with a lot of shopping bags waiting in a lot of lines for a lot of different hard-to-buy goods such as fruits, vegetables, and clothing not available all year round. But if the people's consumables are poorly distributed, at least their mass transit seems to work efficiently with combinations of trams, trolleys, and buses here in Leningrad. Cost of a fare, about 5 cents. Speaking of subsidized programs, we learned at the world-famous Kirov Ballet Opera House that the best seats in the house go for about $4. Access to the arts is open to all income levels. The Hermitage Museum was the best proof of that, with its 16,000 to 20,000 people visiting each day. There are so many treasures here that our guide told us it would take a person 9 years, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week to see each item for 30 seconds. We got a real feeling and understanding for the Chinese saying, "It's like looking at flowers from horseback." This feeling reoccurred each time we were rushed by tour bus from place to place in each city. But still, the Hermitage in 2.5 hours, while frustrating, did leave some unforgettable impressions. These silver treasures bought by Alexander I from England, France, and Germany were just some of the 1.2 million pieces of art taken out of Leningrad in 1941 by train as the Nazis approached. This silver wine cooler from London was made in 1726. Alexander Nevsky's sarcophagus is 1.5 metric tons of pure silver. In other rooms, we saw sculptures such as Falconet's Cupid and an unfinished Michelangelo, the Crouching Boy. There was a finely carved Russian sleigh from 1760, portraits of the Russian royal family, the Romanovs, in walrus tusk, a mosaic of Peter the Great, 2 of only 14 Da Vinci paintings in existence, the Madonna and Child with a flower known as the Bernois Madonna, done in oil, and the Madonna and Child or Liptha Madonna, painted with tempera. Raphael painted this Madonna and Child with book in 1500 when he was just 17, and Rembrandt used his wife for this painting of the Goddess of Flowers. Other Rembrandts, 26 in all, are on display, as are works by El Greco, Murillo, and Gabriel Meteux, here being copied by a young artist. The main building of the Hermitage, known as the Winter Palace, has 1,057 rooms. Only 300 of them are open to visitors, but what a magnificent collection those 300 rooms hold. The splendor of the Winter Palace indoors is nearly matched by the outdoor splendors of Peter the Great's Summer Palace, which is a hydrofoil ride down the Neva River and across the Gulf of Finland in the Baltic Sea. Badly damaged by bombs and fire during World War II, the palace and grounds have been completely restored to their former regal elegance. Here, manicured gardens, polished statues, and large fountains reflect the pride the Russians have for their past. Besides, it's a very popular tourist attraction and brings the state millions in foreign hard currencies. Children are hard to find in Soviet cities during the summer. They are hard to miss in camps and on tours of historical sites. Here, a trick fountain is a popular attraction, as are all the other fountains and sites on the grounds. Before leaving Leningrad, Maine's agricultural delegation had a brief look at Soviet agriculture of years gone by. At the State Museum of Ethnography, old methods of harrowing, harvesting, and gathering wheat compete for attention with miniatures of life in a typical Russian village of 100 years ago and an old Ukrainian farm. From the reality of Russia's past, we came head-on into the unreality of Soviet present. This is Minsk, the capital of the Belarusian Republic and the potato capital of the Soviet Union. We were supposed to stay here long enough to visit a farm, but due to a scheduling foul-up, our stay was just overnight. Enough time, however, to see that Minsk has been largely rebuilt since World War II, when 80% of the city was destroyed. Most of the scars are gone, but unlike most West European cities, there are still vast open spaces not yet developed. The sign says Rostov-na-Donu, or Rostov on the Don. It's a southern city, the gateway of the Caucasus, and not far from the Black Sea. Twice occupied by the Nazis during the war, Rostov, like Minsk, was badly damaged. Work on the infrastructure was everywhere, as were new apartment blocks and office buildings. There seemed to be great building projects everywhere we went in Russia. But as we learned in Leningrad, the management is often so poor that materials get delivered too early and rot in the weather, or too late and foul up the schedule. Construction of statues and memorials to the country's heroes, though, seemed to be a matter of great pride and care. At the Eternal Flame, we were reminded of Russia's 20 million dead in World War II, a fact which might explain why we didn't see a lot of older people. The ones we did see and meet were quite friendly and open.
Борис меня зовут. Борис.
Rostov?
Ростов.
Rostov-на-Дону?
На-Дону, Ростов-на-Дону. Спасибо, приветствую я вас. Спасибо. А вот нельзя фотографии мне как-то сделать. Нельзя, не будет, не получится.
He said, "I'm a factory worker in Rostov. Thank you for talking to me. I can't talk to you anymore. It's not good for me." The Don River attracts tourists from all over Russia and Europe who often arrive on huge tour boats and stay to visit such places as Peter's Pier.
It was built by tourists. Last year it was opened. A lot of tourists come to this place to spend some hours here because it's just on the bank of the River Don. One can have lunch here. In these houses they can spend some time. These rooms are for 2 or for 3. This is a replica of a boat. Such boats were during the reign of Peter the Great. Peter the Great was the founder of the first Russian fleet. So with this fleet he fought for the way out into the Sea of Azov and into the Black Sea.
As with our other stops, we saw a great number of trucks in Rostov, most painted military green or brown, but our guide said they're actually industrial. Another familiar sight wherever we went, these water and soda dispensers. City water is free, but for a kopeck or 2, thirsty walkers can use the communal glass for a drink of limonade, a fruit drink of any number of different flavors. Speaking of liquid refreshments, the highest point of the trip so far for some in the group came on a visit to a state farm 3 hours outside of Rostov. Why we had to travel 6 hours to visit a farm in this land of jet-black, fertile soil, no one could explain, but it was well worth the trip. What was waiting for us on the Igorlisky State Farm was not so much a tour, but a public relations campaign, complete with a film about the farm presented in the farm's new cultural center, a visit to the farm's new variety store with its clothes, foods, and appliances, and a once-in-a-lifetime Cossack banquet. What a spread! On the table were just the hors d'oeuvres. What came in later, onion, potato, and cabbage soups, pots of meat, piles of cold crayfish, well, they were all as delicious as they looked. Don Cossacks are known to be hard drinkers, and to prove the point, our 2 hosts made sure the vodka ran smoothly and often. There were, of course, the inevitable toasts to peace, understanding, and future exchanges.
So we drink to that, yes? To friendship and peace.
By the time lunch was over, most of us were ready to head back to the hotel. We never did get to talk to anyone who got their hands dirty. Moskva, Moscow, the port of 5 seas, capital of the Soviet Union and the Russian Soviet Federated Socialist Republic, over 800 years old, population over 8 million. Almost everywhere we went, we saw metro stations. The metro easily lives up to its reputation of being the finest subway system in the world. But almost as noteworthy is the surface transportation, which, as in Leningrad, Minsk, and Rostov, was a combination of trams, trolleys, and buses. Moscow University overlooks the downtown area with its winding Moscow River. On the skyline are 4 of these large buildings from the Stalin era. Their massive dimensions and upward thrusts are a tangible reflection of Soviet socialist philosophy. Contrasting dramatically with the Stalinist architecture are such new buildings as the Cosmos Hotel, built by the French. In an effort to attract foreign currencies, Intourist, the state tourist agency, has modernized hundreds of hotels all over the country and built several new, very fashionable hotels in major cities. Whether new or old, however, all hotels hold visitors' passports in exchange for room passes. To get your key, you must show your pass. A small inconvenience when the result is a room with a view, the monument to space travel, the exhibition for economic achievement, and a duplicate of the Soviet pavilion in the Montreal World's Fair. The shops have more goods in their windows than Leningrad stores, the only advertising, more slogans and pictures of worker heroes. This call for achievement and peace was everywhere we went and points to what has been described as the Soviet citizen's search for a life of meaning. Since they don't have access to Western symbols of success like vacation homes and other luxuries, the average citizen apparently works towards more abstract goals, ending man's exploitation of his fellow humans and striving towards a world governed by communism gives Soviet workers direction and purpose. It also distracts them from the reality of what to Westerners seems to be their rather bleak and controlled lives. But this may be unfair because while their lives might be more controlled, the state makes sure there's still a lot of color and pageantry around. And from the earliest years of childhood, they're taught that working together as a team can have beautiful and dramatic results. Some 100,000 people packed Lenin Stadium to see the opening ceremonies of the socialist country's games. Gymnastics teams of all ages filled the field with their different mass displays. In the stands, another kind of display. The feeling of pride we sensed in the audience was more proof of the Russian dual personality, warm and emotional when there's no threat, and cold and unapproachable when alone and vulnerable. The Russian singer and poet Vysotsky once said, "Cupolas in Russia are gilded in pure gold so that God will notice them more often." The old Russian Orthodox churches of Moscow are well cared for and attract a lot of attention. Here at the New Maiden Nunnery, where Khrushchev is buried, we learned that Napoleon's plan to blow up the fortress as he retreated was squashed by a nun who pulled out the fuse after the French left. Religion may not have mass appeal in Russia, but those who do attend and support churches do so with great conviction. Many of the old churches, though, are now museums. The most famous of all is St. Basil's Cathedral, built in the 16th century by order of Ivan the Terrible to commemorate the Russian victory over the invading Tartars. St. Basil's has to share the limelight, though, because it's on Krasnaya Ploshet, known in English as Red Square. This massive cobblestone square attracts people from all over. Newlyweds will often come here for pictures, as will tourists from inside and outside the country. Red Square used to be called Central Square when it was first built at the end of the 15th century. Now it's central to the hearts of every Soviet citizen because here, beside the Kremlin wall, is Lenin's tomb. Every hour on the hour, the changing of the guard brings a hushed sense of reverence to the square. Opposite Lenin's tomb and the Kremlin is GUM, the country's largest department store. Few in the group went in. Those who did were impressed with the size, but not the products. No trip to the Soviet Union can be complete without a visit inside the fortress Kremlin. While the official entrance for government members and visiting statesmen is on Red Square, tourists use a side entrance and are kept well away from government offices. These churches are some of the most beautifully preserved examples in the country. The Tsar's bell never rung, and the Tsar's cannon never fired, are magnets for group picture taking. Contrasting dramatically with the Kremlin's museum pieces, the Hall of the People stands out as a symbol of the Soviet New Age. Before leaving the Soviet Union, we had two memorable meetings. The first, with officials of the Ministry of Agriculture, went a long way towards explaining details of how agriculture works in Russia. The second was with an American who works in this building, the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. William Halloran, the U.S. Army attaché and a native of Presque Isle, Maine, met briefly with us to say hi to old friends. Among other things, as a result of our meetings, we learned that only about 1% of the land is arable, 25% of the workforce deals with agriculture. The Soviet press paints our society as one that's falling apart, and life is getting better in the Soviet Union. Some 8.5 hours east by jet, we found that life is better than ever in China, too. The capital, Peking, or Beijing, is a study in contrasts, from the modern streets and highways and their trucks and buses, to the country roads and their tractors and three-horse wagons, from the brand new and not yet completed apartment complexes to the one-story shacks nearby, from the communal spirit of early morning exercises out in the neighborhood streets to the exclusive and tightly guarded privacy of the state guest house where we stayed. What we saw in China was a society of 1,030,000,000 people trying very hard to catch up and at the same time to impress the rest of the world with its ancient beauty. Here in the Diaoyutai guest house compound, we were surrounded by the beauty and wealth taken for granted by the imperial courts of past centuries. Now, as then, the state guest house is off limits to ordinary Chinese citizens. Nixon stayed here with his entourage, as do all visiting dignitaries. The classical beauty of the outdoors is matched well by the deep pile, air-conditioned simplicity of each villa. Meeting rooms and hallways are filled with art treasures. But while the rooms are luxurious, the water has to be boiled, even here. In the dining room, we were treated to a vegetarian banquet with foods prepared and cooked to look and taste like meat dishes. Course after course of exquisite dishes, from vegetarian's goose with sauce to cake and watermelon, kept the group quietly amazed until it was time for the inevitable toasts of Mautai.
Good health, lucky journey.
We knew that food was going to be one of the highlights of our stay in China, and we weren't disappointed. While initially filling, the meals were never heavy, always colorful and thoughtfully prepared and served. At one such meal, the group hosted Dr. Shen Yuyi of Tianjin University, who had spent 2 years at the University of Maine at Orono as a visiting physics researcher. Shen had appeared on Maine Public Television and had met the group earlier in the year. Here, on the other side of the world, Shen brought his wife and son to meet the delegates. To avoid setting precedents, however, they were not allowed to tour with us, so they didn't get to see the Marco Polo People's Commune. They also missed the Summer Palace, which is outside Beijing. This used to be the exclusive playground of the emperor and his court. Here, the pavilion for heralding spring and the hall that dispels the clouds vie for attention with the garden of harmonious interests and the gate of benevolence and longevity. But while the Summer Palace is magnificent and beautiful, the buildings of downtown Beijing are ominous and overpowering in their sheer size. Mao's tomb and the other structures on Tiananmen Square contrast with the ancient style of the Forbidden City. The fortress is just north of Tiananmen, or the Gate of Heavenly Peace, and was begun in 1406. Since the 15th century, various dynasties with their emperors, empresses, eunuchs, and concubines had exclusive use of the city until 1925, when it was finally opened to the common people. The emperors of the Ming dynasty are buried beyond these sentinels of the Ming tombs, a complex of 13 imperial tombs in a 40 square kilometer area. Emperor Wan Li's tomb was finished in 1620. The other tombs have yet to be excavated. Not far from the resting place of the Mings, we experienced the highlight of our 2-week journey. We're on the Great Wall. 777 BC was when it was started. We're climbing up. The view is spectacular, even though it is a little bit misty. Hundreds and hundreds of people walking up in this stretch. Truly amazing. Well over 2,000 years old. And doesn't look bad at all. Of course, this place has been reconstructed and cared for through the years. It's a very friendly wall that we have here. It used to be something that was used to fight aggressors as a very strong defense hundreds of years ago. But now it's a wall of friendship. It's something that seems to be tying all nationalities together. Also of note is the fact that this is the only man-made object that's visible from the moon. While we soaked up the feeling of timelessness and awe that the wall imposes, we stopped to think about the people we'd met so far. Potato farmer Arnold Roach.
To me, there's a tremendous difference in the two countries. As they take in Russia, everything seemed to be very cold. The people were, they were very cold. It was hard to get close to them and hard to get them to open up. But here in China, the people are extremely friendly. You see smiles on the faces of most all of the people. In Russia, you couldn't help but notice a very extreme lack of smiles. And I think that the difference between the two countries in that respect is absolutely tremendous.
Leona Dow of Dover Foxcroft.
I think we're seeing it the way it is right here in China. As in Russia, we just saw what they wanted us to see.
Our guide, spoke of our improving relations.
In these 10 years, the relation between the China and United States also have developed very fast, but also have a little problems. That is the Taiwan province.
How about life in China? How is it changing? Is it getting much better?
Yes. After liberations, Chinese people's their life standards improved and increased very fast. And couldn't compare with the people's life before liberations.
State Representative Dan Callahan was here in the 1930s.
The first impression I saw there were the people swimming out to the boat, picking up all the garbage we thrown overboard. And it was not uncommon to see babies floating down the Yangtze River. People were very, very poor. Today, everyone seems to be healthy and working and having places to live.
As the focus and hope for China is on its future, our visit to the Shanghai Children's Palace gave us a hint of how bright that future will be. The young people here and at other children's palaces had to pass tests to gain admission. This 16-year-old has definite plans for her life work.
I'm just studying English now, and I think I want to be a diplomat.
Shanghai has long been a city of international relations and trade. This skyline is a familiar one to those who were here during the days of colonialism and concessions. But it too is changing, as are the scenes along the Huangpu River. Commerce is king here. All the way from Shanghai to the Yangtze River, some 30 kilometers of docks and factories. This is China's biggest pipeline into and out of the country. And while this may not be as aesthetically pleasing to Chinese and Western eyes as the Great Wall and the Summer Palace, the Chinese are pragmatists, and so they accept new ways that are helpful to them and promise them a brighter future. In our next segment, we'll pay closer attention to the agriculture of China and Russia and learn, among other things, how a system of personal responsibility and pride is radically changing the output of Chinese communes. Behind the curtains, Mainers in Russia and China, an agricultural view. When 23 Mainers traveled to Russia and China this past summer to get a feel for the agriculture in those countries, many had little or no idea of what to expect. Most of us had a connection with agriculture either by vocation, potato farming or agricultural equipment, marriage, or by living in farm communities. As members of a people-to-people goodwill mission, we knew our guides were ready to show us many positive aspects of life and work down on the farm. To appreciate more fully the progress that's been made in the Soviet Union, we toured the State Museum of Ethnography in Leningrad and saw several examples of how farms were run in years gone by. Contrasting dramatically with the past was the economic achievement exhibit in Moscow, in which the group saw fleetingly what conditions might be on an ideal Soviet farm today. Unfortunately, the word fleetingly characterized much of the agricultural experience in Russia. The Chinese would say it's like looking at flowers from horseback. We saw the only potato field of the trip here. In the Rostov region of southern Russia, the group spent several hours on the Igorlysky State Farm. Of the 27,000 acres on the farm, about 22,000 were arable and used for grain, meat, and milk production. Some